Hello, my name is Jake. I'm 28. I work construction during the day and fix motorcycles in my garage at night. I've been living with my buddy Mike in a duplex on the south side of town. Mike's the kind of guy who leaves his dishes in the sink for days and thinks putting a pizza box on top of the trash can counts as taking it out. But he pays his half of the rent on time and doesn't ask questions when I'm out there at midnight with my wrench set, so we make it work. What Mike never mentioned in all our late night conversations about work, women, and whether we should finally get cable was that his older sister Sarah had been living in Seattle. He never mentioned that she'd been married to some tech executive who worked long hours and treated her like another item on his schedule. And he definitely never mentioned that she'd been thinking about coming home. I found out about Sarah the same way I find out about most things in Mike's life, by accident and usually at the worst possible moment. It was a Tuesday evening. I'd just gotten home from a job site where we'd been pouring concrete all day, and my back felt like someone had used it for batting practice. I was covered in dust and cement residue, my work boots caked with mud, and all I wanted was a hot shower and maybe a beer afterward. Mike's truck wasn't in the driveway, which meant he was probably at his girlfriend Lisa's place again. That was fine by me. Some nights, the quiet was exactly what I needed. I fumbled with my keys at the front door, my fingers still stiff from gripping tools all day. The lock always stuck a little. We'd been meaning to fix it for months, and I had to jiggle the key just right to get it to turn. When I finally got the door open, I stepped inside and immediately knew something was different. The house smelled like vanilla and coffee instead of Mike's usual combination of old pizza and whatever cologne he'd been experimenting with that week. The living room was actually clean. Not just picked up, but clean. The coffee table was cleared off. The couch cushions were arranged properly. Even the stack of motorcycle magazines I'd left on the end table had been organized into a neat pile. I stood there in the doorway, still holding my keys, trying to process what I was seeing. Had Mike finally decided to grow up? Or had we been robbed by the world's most considerate burglar? That's when I heard footsteps coming from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate footsteps that definitely didn't belong to Mike. Mike moved through the house like he was always late for something, all heavy steps and banging cabinet doors. These footsteps were different, lighter, more careful. I set my keys on the table by the door and walked toward the kitchen. My work boots were loud against the hardwood floor. "Mike," I called out, even though I knew it wasn't him. The footsteps stopped. I reached the kitchen doorway and saw her standing by the sink, her back to me. She was tall, maybe 5'7", with dark hair that fell just past her shoulders. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater that looked expensive, the kind of clothes that suggested she had her life more together than most people I knew. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she turned around slowly, and I found myself looking at a face that was unmistakably related to Mike. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline, but refined somehow, like someone had taken Mike's features and softened all the rough edges. "You must be Jake," she said, and her voice was exactly what I'd expected. Warm but careful, like she was used to choosing her words precisely. "And you must be the sister Mike never talks about," I said, then immediately wished I could take it back. Way to make a great first impression. But she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "That sounds like Mike. I'm Sarah." We stood there for a moment, taking each other in. I was suddenly very aware of how I must look, covered in construction dust, probably smelling like sweat and concrete, my hair sticking up in directions that defied physics. She, on the other hand, looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, not in a flashy way, but in that effortless way that suggested she knew exactly who she was and was comfortable with it. "Mike's not here," I said because it seemed like something I should probably mention. "I know, he's at Lisa's. He said he'd be back later." She glanced at the clock on the microwave. "I was hoping to surprise him, but I got here early and—" She gestured around the kitchen. "I couldn't just sit in a messy house." I looked around and realized she'd been busy. The dishes that had been piling up in the sink were gone. The counters were clear. Even the stovetop looked like someone had actually scrubbed it. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "I know, but I needed something to do with my hands." She paused, and I caught something in her expression. a flicker of something that looked like sadness or maybe just exhaustion. Besides, I figured if I'm going to be staying here for a while, I might as well make it livable. Staying here? I asked, and then felt stupid for asking. Of course she was staying here. Why else would she be cleaning our kitchen like she owned the place? Mike didn't tell you. It wasn't a question. I'm not surprised. He's never been great at communication. She moved to the coffee maker. When had we gotten a coffee maker that actually worked? And poured herself a cup. Want some? It's actually decent coffee, not whatever that stuff is you guys usually drink. I looked down at my work clothes. I should probably shower first. The coffee will still be here when you get out. She settled into one of the kitchen chairs, wrapping her hands around the mug like she was trying to warm them. Take your time. I'm not going anywhere. There was something about the way she said it that made me pause. Not going anywhere, like it was a decision she'd had to make rather than a simple statement of fact. I wanted to ask more questions. Why was she here? How long was she staying? What had happened in Seattle? But something about her posture told me this wasn't the time. So I just nodded and headed toward the bathroom, leaving her sitting in our newly cleaned kitchen with her expensive coffee and whatever story had brought her back home. The hot water felt like a blessing against my sore muscles. I stood under the spray longer than I usually did, letting the heat work out the knots in my shoulders while I tried to process what had just happened. Mike had a sister. She was beautiful and mad and had apparently left her life in Saddle to come stay in our disaster of a duplex. And for some reason, Mike had never mentioned any of this. When I got out of the shower, I could hear voices from the kitchen, Mike's familiar laugh and Sarah's quieter responses. I threw on clean jeans and a t-shirt and made my way back downstairs. They were sitting at the kitchen table, and the resemblance between them was even more obvious now. But where Mike always seemed to be vibrating with restless energy, Sarah had a stillness about her that was almost hypnotic. "There he is," Mike said when he saw me. "Sarah, meet my roommate, Jake." Jake meets Sarah, the sister who's apparently decided our couch is more comfortable than her fancy Seattle apartment. Sarah shot him a look that could have frozen water. "It's temporary, Mike." "Hey, I'm not complaining. Someone finally cleaned this place." Mike gestured around the kitchen. "You should have seen it, Jake. She walked in here and immediately went into full mom mode." "I'm not your mom," Sarah said quietly, but there was an edge to her voice that suggested this was familiar territory. I poured myself a cup of coffee. She was right. It was much better than our usual stuff, and sat down at the table. "So, how long are you visiting?" Sarah and Mike exchanged a look that lasted a beat too long. "She's not visiting," Mike said finally. "She's moving back permanently." "It's not permanent," Sarah corrected. "I just need some time to figure things out." "What's to figure out? You left that husband, your home, end of story." Sarah's jaw tightened. "It's more complicated than that, Mike." I sipped my coffee and tried to disappear into the background. This felt like a conversation I shouldn't be witnessing, but there was nowhere to go that wouldn't make it obvious I was trying to escape. "What's complicated about it?" Mike pressed. "The guy treated you like garbage. You're better off without him." "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know enough. I know he made you feel like you weren't good enough. I know he controlled every aspect of your life. I know—" "Stop." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Just stop." The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I stared into my coffee cup and wished I was anywhere else. "I'm sorry," Mike said finally. I'm glad you're home." Sarah's expression softened. "I know. Me too." She looked at me then, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "I'm sorry you're getting dragged into family drama on your first day meeting me." "It's fine," I said, and meant it. "We all have family drama. What's your family like?" she asked, and I got the sense she was genuinely curious, not just trying to change the subject. "Small, just me and my dad, mostly. My mom died when I was young." "I'm sorry," I shrugged. "It was a long time ago. Dad and we figured it out. He taught me everything I know about fixing things." "Is that how you got into construction?" "Sort of. Started helping him with projects around the house. Then neighbors started asking for help, and eventually it just became what I did." I paused. What about you? What did you do in Seattle? Marketing for a tech company. She said it like it left a bad taste in her mouth. Did you like it? She was quiet for a long moment. I thought I did, or maybe I just liked the idea of it, the salary, the title, the life it was supposed to give me. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Turns out none of that matters much if you're miserable. Mike had gotten up to rummage through the refrigerator, leaving Sarah and me alone at the table. I found myself studying her face, trying to read the story written in the lines around her eyes, the way she held her shoulders like she was carrying something heavy. What do you want to do now? I asked. She looked up, surprised. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. She paused. Is that terrible that I'm in my 30s and I have no idea what I want to do with my life? I don't think so. I think it means you're honest. She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her whole face. Mike said you were the philosophical type. Mike talks about me? Sometimes. He said you're the only roommate he's ever had who actually improves the place instead of making it worse. I laughed. The bar was probably pretty low. Probably. She was still smiling. He also said you're one of the good ones. There was something about the way she said it that made my chest tighten. One of the good ones. Like that was a rare thing. Mike returned to the table with leftover pizza, and the conversation shifted to safer topics. How much the neighborhood had changed. Mutual friends from high school, whether the Seahawks had any chance of making the playoffs. Normal sibling stuff that I could listen to without feeling like I was intruding. But I found myself watching Sarah more than I was listening to the conversation. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she laughed at Mike's terrible jokes even when they weren't funny, the way she seemed to be studying everything around her like she was trying to memorize it. Mike announced he was going to bed. He had an early shift at the warehouse and Lisa was picking him up in the morning. You two don't stay up too late talking philosophy, he said, ruffling Sarah's hair as he passed her chair. She swatted at him. I'm not 15, Mike. Could have fooled me. You're sitting in the same spot you used to sit in when you'd wait up for me to get home from dates. Sarah's cheeks turned pink. That was different. If you say so. Mike grinned at me. Fair warning, Jake. She's going to want to know your entire life story before she decides whether you're trustworthy. Mike, Sarah said, but he was already heading up the stairs. We sat in the sudden quiet, listening to Mike's footsteps overhead and the sound of water running through the pipes. He's not wrong, Sarah said finally. I do like to know who I'm living with. What do you want to know? She considered this. What's the worst thing you've ever done? I wasn't expecting that. Wow, starting with the heavy stuff. I figure if we're going to be living in the same house, I should know if you're secretly a serial killer or something. Not a serial killer, I said. But I did steal a candy bar from a gas station when I was 8. Does that disqualify me? She laughed. I think you're safe. What else? I thought about it. I broke up with a girl by just not calling her back. This was years ago, but I still feel bad about it. She deserved better than that. Why didn't you call her back? Because I was a coward. She was talking about moving in together, and I panicked. Instead of having an honest conversation about not being ready, I just disappeared. Sarah nodded like this made perfect sense. What would you do differently now? Have the conversation, even if it was hard, even if it hurt her feelings. I paused. What about you? What's the worst thing you've ever done? She was quiet for so long, I thought she might not answer. I stayed, she said finally. Stayed where? In my marriage, after I knew it was over. I stayed because it was easier than admitting I'd made a mistake, because leaving felt like giving up. She stared into her coffee cup. But staying was worse for both of us. Why was it easier? Because leaving meant starting over. It meant admitting that all those people who said I was too young to get married were right. It meant giving up the life I thought I wanted and figuring out what I actually wanted instead. She looked up at me. It meant coming home and explaining to my little brother why his successful big sister was suddenly sleeping on his couch. I wanted to tell her that there was nothing wrong with sleeping on Mike's couch, that sometimes starting over was the bravest thing you could do, that she didn't owe anyone an explanation for choosing her own happiness. But something about her expression told me she'd heard all of that before. How long were you married, I asked instead. 4 years. We dated for a while before that. She shook her head. 6 years of my life. That's not nothing. Those years still count, even if they didn't end the way you planned. She looked at me with surprise. Most people say I'm lucky to get out while I'm still young. Maybe you are lucky, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. We talked until late. She told me about Seattle, about the job she'd loved until she didn't, about the apartment with the view of the sound that never felt like home. I told her about growing up with just my dad, about learning to fix motorcycles in our garage, about the satisfaction of building something with your hands that would still be standing long after you were gone. It was the kind of conversation I hadn't had in years, honest and meandering and comfortable in a way that usually took months to develop with someone. When she finally said she should probably get some sleep, I was disappointed. The couch folds out, I said. Mike probably didn't mention that. He did, thank you. She stood up and started gathering the coffee cups. I can do that, I said. It's fine, I'm used to cleaning up. She paused at the sink. Thank you for tonight, for listening. Thank you for the good coffee, she smiled. There's more where that came from. I went upstairs feeling like something had shifted, though I couldn't put my finger on what exactly. Sarah was beautiful, yes, but it was more than that. There was something about her that made me want to be more careful with my words, more thoughtful about my actions, like she was worth the extra effort. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a routine. I'd come home from work to find the house transformed, not just clean, but organized in ways that made sense. She'd moved my motorcycle magazines to a shelf instead of leaving them scattered on tables. She'd bought actual food and started cooking dinners that didn't come from a box or a drive-through window. You don't have to do all this, I told her one evening as she handed me a plate of something that smelled incredible. I know, but I like it. It gives me something to focus on while I figure out what comes next. Any ideas about that? She shrugged. I've been thinking about going back to school, maybe getting a teaching certificate. You want to be a teacher? I used to before I got caught up in the whole corporate thing. She sat down across from me with her own plate. I always loved working with kids, and there's something appealing about a job where you're actually making a difference instead of just making money. That sounds like a good plan. It's scary, though, starting over. Starting over at any age is scary, I said. Doesn't mean it's not worth doing. She looked at me with that expression again, surprised like she wasn't used to people encouraging her dreams instead of pointing out all the reasons they might not work. We started spending more time together in the evenings. Mike was usually at Lisa's place, so it was just the two of us, talking over dinner or watching old movies on the ancient television that came with the house. Sarah had strong opinions about everything. Movies, books, politics, the best way to organize a kitchen, and I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than I probably should have. She was smart in a way that made me want to be smarter, not in a condescending way, but in a way that made me think more carefully about things I'd always taken for granted. When I mentioned that I'd been thinking about starting my own construction company someday, she didn't just nod and say that sounded nice. She asked about business plans and startup costs and whether I'd considered specializing in a particular type of construction. Have you thought about green building? She asked. One night as we sat on the front porch, sharing a beer and watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in the fading light. Green building, sustainable construction, solar panels, energy-efficient materials, that kind of thing. It's becoming a big market. I don't know much about that stuff. You could learn. There are certification programs, workshops. She turned to look at me. You're good with your hands, and you care about quality work. That's more than half the battle. I'd never thought about it that way. In my mind, I was just a guy who knew how to swing a hammer and read blueprints. But Sarah saw something more, something I hadn't even seen in myself. What made you think of that? I asked. Because you're always talking about building things that last, things that matter. Green building is about building things that don't just last, but that make the world a little bit better. She took a sip of her beer. Plus, it's where the market is heading. You might as well get ahead of the curve. That night, I lay in bed thinking about solar panels and energy-efficient windows, and what it might feel like to build houses that actually help the environment instead of just taking up space. It was the first time in years that I'd felt excited about the future instead of just getting through the present. Sarah had been with us for a while when things started to change between us. It was subtle at first, conversations that lasted a little longer, moments when our eyes would meet across the kitchen and neither of us would look away first. The way she'd brush my shoulder when she reached past me to get something from a cabinet. I told myself it didn't mean anything. She was going through a divorce, dealing with a major life transition. Probably the last thing she needed was her brother's roommate developing feelings for her. But that didn't stop me from noticing the way she hummed while she cooked, or the way she curled up in the corner of the couch with a book, or the way she looked in the morning before she'd had her coffee, sleepy and soft and beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. Mike, thankfully, seemed oblivious to whatever was happening between Sarah and me. He was too caught up in his own relationship drama with Lisa to pay much attention to the way his sister and I had started gravitating toward each other. But I could tell Sarah was starting to notice. She'd catch me looking at her sometimes, and instead of looking away, she'd hold my gaze for a beat longer than was strictly necessary. When we were cooking together, which had become a regular thing, she'd find excuses to touch my arm or my hand, little moments of contact that sent electricity through my entire body. I knew I was in trouble the night she fell asleep on the couch while we were watching a movie. I'd been sitting on the opposite end, trying to maintain a respectful distance, but sometime during the second half of the film, she'd shifted position and ended up with her head on my shoulder. I should have woken her up, should have suggested she'd be more comfortable in her own bed. Instead, I sat there for hours, barely breathing, memorizing the weight of her head against my shoulder and the way her hair smelled like vanilla and something uniquely her. When she finally woke up, she didn't immediately pull away. For a moment, we just sat there, her head still on my shoulder, both of us pretending this was normal. "Sorry," she said finally, sitting up and running her hands through her hair. "I didn't mean to fall asleep on you." "It's okay," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I'd intended. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my heart race. But before either of us could say anything, we heard Mike's key in the front door. Sarah immediately moved to the other end of the couch, and by the time Mike walked into the living room, we were sitting like two people who definitely hadn't been cuddling on the couch. "How was the movie, Mike? Cafe?" Mike asked, grabbing a beer from the kitchen. "Good," Sarah said, not looking at me. "I'm going to bed." She disappeared upstairs, leaving Mike and me alone in the living room. "Everything okay?" Mike asked. Sarah seemed weird. "She's fine, just tired." Mike nodded and settled into his chair, but I could tell he was studying my face. "You know she's going through a rough time, right?" "I know. She doesn't need any more complications in her life." I looked at him sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just, she's my sister, you know. I want to make sure she's okay." "She's safe here, Mike. You know that." He held my gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, I know." But something had shifted. Mike was watching us now, and Sarah seemed to sense it too. Over the next few days, she was more careful around me. Sitting farther away on the couch, avoiding the casual touches that had become so natural, going to bed earlier to avoid those late-night conversations we'd both come to treasure. I missed her, which was ridiculous because she was still there, still living in the same house, still making incredible dinners and keeping our disaster of a home organized and livable. But the easy intimacy we'd developed was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that felt like a wall between us. Things came to a head when Mike went to visit his girlfriend's parents for the weekend, leaving Sarah and me alone in the house for the first time since that night on the couch. I'd been working on a motorcycle in the garage, trying to lose myself in the familiar rhythm of taking apart and putting back together, when Sarah appeared in the doorway. "Can I watch?" she asked. I looked up from the engine I'd been rebuilding. She was wearing jeans and an old t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in days. "It's not very exciting," I said. "I don't mind. I like watching people work with their hands." She settled onto an old chair I kept in the corner of the garage, tucking her feet up under her. For a while, we didn't talk. I worked on the carburetor while she watched, and gradually the tension that had been building between us started to ease. My dad used to have a motorcycle, she said finally. Yeah, what kind? I don't remember. This was when I was really little, before Mike was born. Mom made him sell it when she got pregnant. Did he mind? I think so, but he never said anything about it. She was quiet for a moment. He used to take me for rides sometimes, just around the neighborhood. I remember feeling like we were flying. I could picture it, a younger version of Sarah, arms wrapped around her father's waist, hair streaming behind her as they rode through the streets of their childhood neighborhood. Did you ever miss it? I asked. Being that young when everything seemed possible? Sometimes, but I think I was too eager to grow up back then. I wanted to be an adult so badly I never really appreciated being a kid. She paused. What about you? Do you miss being young? I don't know if I was ever really young. After Mom died, Dad and we had to figure out how to take care of each other. I grew up pretty fast. That must have been hard. It was, but it also taught me things. How to be responsible, how to fix things when they break. I looked up at her. How to recognize what's worth keeping. There was something in her expression that made my hands still on the wrench I'd been holding. We looked at each other across the garage, and I felt that same electricity I'd felt the night that she'd fallen asleep on my shoulder. Jake, she said softly. Yeah? I need to tell you something. My heart started racing. Okay. She took a deep breath. I've been thinking about what you said about starting over being scary but worth doing. And I filed the divorce papers yesterday. I set down my tools and really looked at her. How do you feel about that? Terrified, relieved, excited, like I might throw up. She laughed, but it sounded shaky. All of those things at once, that sounds about right. The thing is, she continued, I realize that I've been so focused on what I'm leaving behind, I haven't been thinking about what I might be moving toward. What do you think you're moving toward? She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her choosing her words carefully. I think I'm moving toward the kind of life where I get to choose what matters to me, where I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not. She paused. Where I can be honest about what I want. What do you want? She looked at me then, and I saw something in her eyes that made my breath catch. I want to go back to school and become a teacher. I want to live somewhere that feels like home instead of just a place I sleep. I want to be with someone who sees me for who I really am, not who they think I should be. The garage was quiet except for the sound of our breathing and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Sarah, I said. I know this is complicated, she said quickly. I know the timing is terrible. I know Mike would probably have opinions about this, but I also know that I've spent the last years ignoring what I wanted because it wasn't practical or convenient or what other people expected from me. She stood up from the chair and took a step closer to me. I don't want to ignore this, she said. I stood up too, wiping my hands on a rag, even though they were already clean. This, the way I feel when I'm with you, the way you listen to me like what I'm saying actually matters. The way you make me want to be braver than I am. We were standing close enough now that I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. You are brave, I said. You left a life that wasn't making you happy. You're starting over. That's the definition of brave. I don't feel brave. I feel terrified most of the time. Being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. It just means what you're doing matters enough to be scary. She smiled at that, and I felt something shift between us, not the careful politeness of the past week, but something deeper and more honest. Can I ask you something? She said. Anything. That night I fell asleep on your shoulder. Did you mind? No, I said. I didn't mind. Good, she said, because I wasn't really asleep. Before I could process what that meant, she closed the distance between us and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like she was asking a question. But when I kissed her back, when I brought my hands up to frame her face, it became something else entirely. It became an answer to a question I hadn't even realized I'd been asking. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Is this okay? She asked. More than okay, I said. But are you sure about this? About us? I'm not sure about anything right now, she said, except that I'm tired of being afraid of what I want. We spent the rest of the weekend talking and kissing and figuring out what this thing between us might look like. It wasn't just physical, though the attraction was definitely there. It was the way she made me think about the future differently, the way she challenged me to want more for myself than I'd ever thought possible. I've been thinking about what you said, I told her one morning as we sat on the front porch with coffee and the newspaper, about green building. Yeah, I looked into some of those certification programs. There's one starting soon. Her face lit up. Really? It's expensive, and it means I'd have to work part-time for a while to take the classes, but I shrugged. You were right. It's where the market is heading. That's amazing, Jake. It's scary as hell. The best things usually are. We were interrupted by the sound of Mike's truck in the driveway. Sarah and I looked at each other, and I could see the same question in her eyes that I was feeling. How much did we tell him, and when? We should probably talk to him, she said, together. Together. Mike walked up the front steps, looking tired but happy. His weekend with Lisa's family had apparently gone well. How was your weekend? He asked, settling into the third chair on the porch. Good, Sarah said, quiet. Mike looked back and forth between us, and I could see him picking up on the subtle changes, the way Sarah and I were sitting closer together, the way we kept glancing at each other, the general air of two people who had figured something important out. Okay, he said slowly, what's going on? Sarah took a deep breath. Mike, I need to tell you something. If you're moving out, I'm going to be pissed. I just got used to having clean dishes. She laughed. I'm not moving out, at least not anytime soon. Then what? Sarah looked at me, and I nodded encouragingly. Jake and I, she began, then stopped. We have become close. Mike was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Close how? He asked finally. Close like we care about each other, I said. Like we want to see where this goes. Mike looked at me, then at Sarah, then back at me. Are you serious about this? He asked me. Very serious. Because if you hurt her, I'll kill you. Not metaphorically, literally. Mike, Sarah protested. No, he's right, I said. If I hurt her, you should kill me. Mike stared at me for another moment, then broke into a grin. Well, it's about time, he said. I was wondering how long you two were going to keep pretending you weren't crazy about each other. You knew? Sarah asked. Sarah, you've been cooking dinner every night and asking Jake's opinion about everything from what movie to watch to what color towels to buy. And Jake, you've been walking around here like someone hit you over the head with a hammer every time she smiles at you. Mike shook his head. I was starting to think I was going to have to lock you two in a closet together. Sarah and I looked at each other and started laughing. So, you're okay with this? Sarah asked. I'm more than okay with it. Jake's a good guy, and you deserve someone who treats you right. Mike paused. Plus, maybe now he'll stop moping around the house like a lovesick teenager. I don't mope, I protested. You mope, Sarah said, grinning. It's actually kind of cute. Over the next few months, Sarah and I settled into a relationship that felt both new and comfortable, like something we'd been building toward without realizing it. She enrolled in a teaching program at the local community college, and I started the green building certification course. We were both scared, both starting over, but we were doing it together. The duplex started to feel like a real home instead of just a place where three adults happened to sleep. Sarah planted flowers in the front yard and hung curtains in the living room. I fixed the sticky lock on the front door and built shelves for all the books she'd had shipped from Seattle. Mike complained about feeling like the third wheel, but I could tell he was happy to see his sister smiling again. You know what I love about this? Sarah said one evening as we sat on the couch, her feet in my lap while she graded practice teaching assignments. What? It doesn't feel like I'm settling. For the first time in my adult life, it feels like I'm choosing something instead of just accepting what's available. I understood what she meant. For years, I'd been drifting through my days, working hard, but not really building toward anything. Now I had goals, plans, a future that excited me instead of just existing to be gotten through. I love you, I said, and it was the first time I'd said it out loud. She looked up from her papers, and her smile was like sunrise. I love you too, she said. Later, Sarah moved out of Mike's room and into mine. It was a small step, practically speaking. We'd been spending most nights together anyway, but it felt significant, like we were claiming this thing between us, making it official. I can't believe my sister is shacking up with my roommate, Mike said, as he helped us move Sarah's dresser upstairs. We're not shacking up, Sarah said. We're cohabitating. Same thing. Yeah, it's completely different. How? Shacking up sounds temporary. This is permanent. Mike looked at me. Is it permanent? I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with an expression that was part hope, part terror. If she'll have me, I said. I'll have you, she said softly. Good, Mike said, because I'm not helping anyone move furniture again. Eventually, I finished my green building certification and started my own company. Sarah completed her teaching program and got a job at the local elementary school. We bought a house 3 blocks away from Mike, close enough that he could still come over for dinner when Lisa wasn't cooking, far enough that we had our own space. The house was small and needed work, but it had good bones and a big backyard where I could set up a proper workshop. Sarah loved the built-in bookshelves in the living room and the way the morning light came through the kitchen windows. It's perfect, she said the day we got the keys. It needs a new roof, and the plumbing is old, I pointed out. I know, but it's ours. That night, as we sat on the floor of our empty living room, sharing takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine, Sarah asked me something that had been on her mind. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't come back? What do you mean? If I'd stayed in Seattle, if I'd tried to make my marriage work, if I'd never met you, I thought about it. I think I would have kept drifting, working the same job, living in the same place, never really pushing myself to want more. And I would have stayed miserable, pretending I was happy because it was easier than admitting I'd made a mistake. She leaned against my shoulder. I'm glad I came back. Me too, even though it was complicated. Especially because it was complicated. The easy stuff isn't usually worth much. She was quiet for a moment, then said, Jake? Yeah, I'm happy. It was such a simple statement, but I could hear everything in it. Surprise that she could feel this way, gratitude for the second chance, hope for whatever came next. Me too, I said. I asked her to marry me, not because I thought we should, or because it was the next logical step, but because I couldn't imagine building a life with anyone else, because she made me want to be the kind of man who deserved her trust, her love, her partnership. I proposed in our backyard, next to the garden she'd planted and the workshop I'd built. Nothing fancy, just the two of us and the life we'd created together. Yes, she said before I'd even finished asking the question. You don't want to think about it? I've been thinking about it for months, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Of course it's yes. We got married in Mike's backyard. With just our families and a few close friends, Sarah wore a simple white dress and flowers in her hair. I wore the only suit I owned and tried not to cry during my vows. You saved me, she said when it was her turn to speak. No, I said, we saved each other. And that was the truth of it. We'd both been lost in different ways, her in a life that looked right from the outside but felt wrong on the inside, me in a routine that was comfortable but not fulfilling. We'd found each other at exactly the moment when we were both ready to be found. Now our life together feels both settled and full of possibility. Sarah loves teaching, and her students adore her. My green building company is growing, and I'm proud of the work we do. Houses that are beautiful and efficient and built to last. We still live in the same small house, though we've renovated most of it room by room. The kitchen has new cabinets and energy-efficient appliances. The bedroom has built-in shelves for Sarah's ever-growing collection of books. The backyard has raised garden beds and a fire pit where we sit on summer evenings, planning our next project or just enjoying the quiet. Mike lives 2 streets over with Lisa, who he finally married. They come over for dinner most Sundays, and we've all settled into the comfortable rhythm of family. Sometimes I think about that first night Sarah came back, how she'd cleaned our disaster of a kitchen and made coffee that actually tasted good, how she looked at me like she was trying to figure out if I was someone she could trust. how neither of us had any idea what we were starting. Do you ever miss it? Sarah asked me recently as we sat on our front porch, watching the neighborhood kids ride their bikes in the fading light. Miss what? The uncertainty, the excitement of not knowing what came next. I thought about it. Sometimes. But I like this better, this knowing that whatever comes next, we'll figure it out together. She smiled and took my hand. Even if it's scary, especially if it's scary, because that's what I've learned about love, about building a life with someone. It's not about finding someone who makes everything easy. It's about finding someone who makes the hard stuff worth doing, someone who sees you clearly and chooses you anyway, someone who makes you want to be braver than you are. Sarah did that for me. She saw a guy who was drifting through his days and challenged him to want more. She saw potential I didn't even know I had and encouraged me to reach for it. She saw someone worth loving and convinced him he was worth loving back. Sometimes we all need to know that it's possible to start over, to choose something different, to build a life that feels like home instead of just a place you happen to be. And if you've ever wondered whether it's worth taking the risk, whether it's worth being vulnerable with someone who might not feel the same way, I can tell you this: it is. The best things in life, the things that matter most, they're usually on the other side of fear. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. Sarah taught me that. She taught me that starting over isn't giving up. It's choosing to believe that you deserve better than just getting by. That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who's willing to build something imperfect and beautiful together. Our life isn't a fairy tale. We argue sometimes about whose turn it is to take out the trash and whether we can afford to renovate the bathroom. Sarah gets stressed during parent-teacher conferences, and I get grumpy when projects don't go according to plan. We're both still figuring out how to be married, how to balance independence with partnership, how to support each other's dreams without losing ourselves in the process. But every morning I wake up next to someone who chose me, who keeps choosing me, who makes me want to be the best version of myself. Every evening, I come home to a house that feels like home because she's in it. Every day, I get to build something, whether it's a house for clients who trust me with their dreams, or a life with the woman who taught me what it means to be truly happy. That's worth everything. The fear, the uncertainty, the risk of being hurt or disappointed. It's all worth it for the chance to love someone and be loved back, for the chance to build something that matters with someone who matters. So if you're drifting, if you're settling, if you're afraid to want more than what you have, don't be. Take the risk. Make the change. Choose the thing that scares you because it matters too much not to be scary. Sometimes the best things in life come disguised as complications. Sometimes the person you're meant to be with is the one you never saw coming. Sometimes starting over is exactly what you need to find your way home. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, your roommate's older sister will open the door slowly and say the words that change everything. Not because she's been waiting for you, but because you've both been waiting for the courage to choose something better. That's what Sarah gave me. Not just her love, but the courage to believe I deserved it. The courage to build a life that feels like mine instead of one I just happened to fall into. The courage to be happy even when happiness requires more bravery than I thought I had. I'm still grateful she came back. Still grateful she chose to stay. Still grateful that sometimes when you're not looking for love, it finds you anyway and changes everything in the best possible way. In the quiet of a dust-covered evening where the scent of vanilla coffee lingers in a freshly cleaned kitchen, Jake's story with Sarah unfolds like a blueprint for courage. A construction worker and motorcycle tinkerer, Jake returns home to find Sarah, his roommate Mike's sister, transforming their chaotic duplex into a haven. Her unexpected return from a stifling marriage in Seattle sparks a connection that begins with hesitant conversations and blooms into a love that defies fear. When Sarah confesses, "I thought you'd never come back," it's not just about her return. It's about choosing to rebuild a life true to herself. Their story, woven through late-night talks and shared dreams of green building and teaching, teaches us that true courage lies in embracing vulnerability to pursue what matters. Sarah's choice to leave a life that diminished her and Jake's leap into a relationship despite complications show that love and growth demand bravery to face the unknown. Their journey reminds us that starting over isn't failure. It's a bold act of reclaiming your worth, building a life where every choice reflects your heart's truth. Have you ever found the courage to start anew or let love guide you through fear? Share your story in the comments, and we'd love to hear how you've built something meaningful from unexpected beginnings. If this tale of quiet bravery and heartfelt connection resonates, subscribe and hit the bell for more stories that inspire us to choose courage over comfort. Let's keep building lives that feel like home together.